Hopefully I will be wrapping this up with one of everyone's favorite topics, and that's evaluation. And you'll notice I will be echoing a lot of what the rest of our speakers have said here today, because when you think about evaluation in a community context, a lot of those factors, talking about being in the community and trust building, are really, really critical. But to start, I'm just going to take a little bit of a step back and just emphasize that evaluation is an essential part of any program plan, whether that's at your institution or in the community, and it's often mistaken as separate from a program design or a program implementation, but really they are inherently connected and dependent on each other. It's also seen as one of the most challenging components of program design and implementation. It's seen as complicated and time-consuming, but really there is no reason to be intimidated by evaluation, because in reality what we call evaluation is really a formalized and organized and intentional way of what we do in everyday life all the time. So when we evaluate, we're thinking, so think about it. I don't know if any of you at home are cooks. I cook, and when I cook, I look at a new recipe and I think, that looks good. Based on my experience, I might tweak a few things, right? I cook it, I get some feedback from my family. Did you like it? Didn't you like it? And then I make some decisions. I decide if I need to make more changes or if I'm just never going to make it again. That's evaluation. I'm collecting data, I'm drawing conclusions, I'm making judgments, and I'm making a decision based on that experience. Same thing for those of you who do programming. You design a curriculum or an activity, you try it out, you tweak it, you get some feedback, and you make a decision. You change it, or it's good how it is. Same thing, you're collecting data, drawing conclusions, making judgments, and making decisions. So really evaluation is not something that is strange to what we do, but it's really putting a little structure around our instincts. So there are a lot of reasons to evaluate. We all know about the traditional reasons. We want to know whether a program is working or whether it's not. We want to improve our programs and we want to measure the success. But there are a lot of co-benefits to evaluating as well, especially in a community-based context. If you incorporate stakeholders into your evaluation and you incorporate program participants into your evaluation so that they get to influence how that program evolves, it really creates much better buy-in and a much more sustainable program. You can also use all of that great documentation that you're collecting, whether it's photographs or quotes or whatever it is, to increase marketing and program visibility. And of course, it can be used for funding, which is always important. So to begin with, I'm just going to take a few minutes and give an overview of the what, why, and how of evaluation, and then in the second part, I'll talk specifically about the challenges and approaches for evaluating community-based projects and programs. So first, just a quick differentiation between evaluation and research. And it's pretty straightforward. Evaluation is making a value judgment. It's specific, it's why a program is or isn't successful, and it's based on pre-identified goals. You already know what you're looking for when you're looking at evaluation. Research, on the other hand, is simply a description. You want to know what's going on, and it's focused on generating generalizable knowledge. So, for example, a research question might be, what are the components of a STEM Pathways program that are most important in ensuring participants are successful in college? Broad can be answered in a lot of different kinds of ways. A evaluation question might be, does the Chicago Botanic Gardens Science Career Continuum successfully support participants in achieving 4-year degrees in STEM? So really specific, program specific. We have a goal and really focused on understanding whether we are meeting that goal or not. There are two major kinds of evaluation, and the terminology here is pretty descriptive. Formative helps inform the program, so it takes place along the way, and the results immediately feed back into the program, so you're evolving that program as it takes place. Summative evaluation summarizes the results. So it's focused on the end result, and it doesn't inform a program in action. They're not mutually exclusive, so a summative evaluation could become formative if you run that program again and implement the changes from there. So finally, before jumping into the community programs part of it, I want to define some terms. And I'm going to define a lot of terms. So hopefully this is not too redundant for many of you, but I want to be really clear about what I'm talking about. So first, documentation. Documentation is anything that you collect that illustrates a program. And it could include traditional evaluation kinds of things, or it can include things that participants do or create or say. Any artifact that comes out of a program is documentation. The data is the information you get from analyzing documentation. You can collect documentation without analyzing it for data. If I take photos of our high school internships posters where they're sharing their research projects to friends and family, I could use those on the website, I could put them in a grant report. That's not evaluation. But if I take all of those photos and I look at them with a rubric that says, how much did these students understand the scientific method, and I look at their hypotheses and their data analysis, that's an evaluation. We have two different kinds of data. There's quantitative data, which are essentially numbers, anything you can count, and there's qualitative data. So things that are not quantified, how people feel, how they think, what they believe, interviews, focus groups, case studies, those kinds of things fall into that qualitative data. And there is a note that a lot of times you can make qualitative data quantitative. So if I do a focus group with my interns and I want to know what they think about conservation, what they tell me can't be counted, but the number of students who say conservation is important can be counted. So it's not a clear division there. You also need to think about how you collect the data and the relationship between the evaluation and the program. And I've called that here traditional versus embedded assessment. Traditional assessment are things that are not part of a program, so like a pre and a post test, traditional assessment. And embedded assessment are things that have both programmatic and evaluation goals. So a daily reflection question, for example, has a purpose in terms of learning, but you could also take the answers to those questions and use them to assess what participants took away from the activity. And this to me is a really important part of thinking about evaluation in informal programs, because we have had the experience of using those traditional types of assessments that then impact participants' experiences, because that kind of assessment brings up unpleasant, for example, connections with school and standardized testing. So that's a caveat in terms of that informal. And finally, there are instruments. And all kinds of instruments, I mentioned a bunch already, surveys, focus groups, interviews, observations, pre and post tests. All of those things are dependent on the kind of program you're running, the goals that you set for yourself, and the kind of measures and data you want to collect to answer those questions. So now that we have some of the basics, how does all this apply in a community-based context? What are the unique parts of this kind of evaluation? And now is where you're going to hear me echo a lot of what you've heard already about thinking about how you work with communities. So before you start with any kind of collaborative program, you have to understand the context in which you're working. Who are the players and what are their motivations? Once you have a shared understanding of goals, you can then move on to program design and evaluation. So the first thing that I like to do is map my community context. So understanding and asking a whole lot of questions. So who are your stakeholders? What are their shared interests? Or do they have competing interests? What are the goals and objectives of the community? And are they different from yours? Where's that overlap? What assets does each organization and the community bring to the table? And this speaks to that capacity building component and recognizing that no matter what community you are working with, they bring all kinds of expertise and resources to the table. They might not be financial, but they are there. And they are really important to leverage and to bring into that programming context. Who's missing from the table? As you look around and you're looking at your stakeholders, is there anyone missing? And then given stakeholders' goals and community goals and your own institution's mission and goals, where's the overlap? Do they fit? And if they don't fit, maybe it's not the right project. And the key here, again, is to take the time to understand the lay of the land so you have that solid foundation on which to build. The second part, we've heard a lot about trust building today, and you'll hear it again from me. You almost think we planned these presentations to go together. But creating that community is that culture of trust is really important, especially if you're new to the community. And again, I'm going to reiterate a lot of the things we've heard all day. Establishing those local partnerships. They'll open doors for you. You can make connections with those with social capital, but those who fly under the radar as well. And having staff be present in the community. Meet people, talk to community members, become a familiar face and a familiar name. The more people get to know you, the more they're going to trust you and be invested in that project. And at the same time, the more you know about them, the more that you can make projects relevant to what their goals are. And then, if you can, create capacity. As I said, all those communities have assets to bring to the table. If they're invested in that project, they will commit those assets. And we all recognize that for a variety of reasons, we can't be in one community, we can't commit to that as much as we might like to for a variety of purposes, whether that's funding or institutional shifts or whatever those are. But making sure that that community knows that you value their assets and that they create that capacity to move it forward. And so this is where it gets really, really important in terms of evaluation. Together, identify and agree on program goals. And this is especially important if you're co-creating programs, because it ensures that everyone is working towards the same definitions of success. And you're not working at cross purposes. And I've seen this happen too often where if you don't do that trust building and have those conversations, those definitions are not shared. So people are working at cross purposes, and it also makes sure that the needs of all stakeholders are taken into account. Then define your goals in concrete and specific ways. What does very specifically success look like? What activities are you going to carry out that lead to that success, and how will you know when you've achieved it? And once you've got those program goals and activities defined, only then can you choose specific evaluation methodology. And so thinking about this from a program design standpoint, you really have to be thinking about evaluation from the very beginning and making sure that you're incorporating that thought process into the entire program design and implementation process. And so once you've done that, then based on your program design and your capacity, you can choose those methods. In terms of program design, how is your program structured? How formal is it? Where and how will evaluation be integrated into your programming? What outcomes are you measuring? Are they quantitative? Are they shifts in beliefs or attitudes? Or are you documenting action? And then what data do you need to measure those outcomes? And capacity. And this is huge because evaluation done well can take a lot of time. But it also, I think, is a rabbit hole that people go down. They see how much data they could collect, and it all looks really interesting and really important. But there's maybe only this thin sliver that actually answers the question that you're asking. And it's really tempting to gather everything you can, but for a lot of us, the capacity, how we're going to collect it, and who is going to do that collecting and analyzing is limited. So to really be parsimonious and targeted in the data that you collect to answer your question. And then these are two of my favorite forms that I thought I would share with you. The the one on your left is a form that I use to frame, I don't know if you can read that, probably not, to frame conversations with community stakeholders. And so there's a box for the garden mission and goals, and the garden's assets and expertise, community goals and concerns, and community assets, so that really when you're having that conversation, you're putting them all down and being really intentional about finding the intersection in that Venn diagram where there's the project that meets everyone's goals that you can all commit to. And then the one on your right is a logic model. And usually when people hear logic models, they groan. But this is one of my favorite evaluation tools because it forces you to organize your thoughts. It forces you to connect inputs and activities and outputs and outcomes and your impact and your measures and your instruments, and to put it all out in a really concrete way. And so the last thing I want to talk about before I wrap up is authentic assessment. And this goes back again to what a lot of us have, what the earlier speakers have said as well. Authentic assessment incorporates all of the methodologies that I've talked about already today, but its focus is a little bit different. It focuses on outcomes that are significant and meaningful and relevant to the participants and the community outside of the project context. So you have your goals, for example, a community garden. It might be your institutional goals that introduce people to native plants and maybe help with stormwater management in terms of, and increase environmental knowledge. The community might be on board with that, but what they really want is a green space where they can gather. And so if you can put those two things together and measure both of them, then you are really building a foundation that everyone is bought into. And from co-developing a project from the beginning, you can ensure that the goals of both, all the organizations are met, they get what they hoped out of it, and it makes for a more successful and sustainable project. Thank you, and I appreciate you all hanging out to the very end.